My name is Alex Carrigg. I'm an independent photographer, and I covered the January 6th attack on the United States Capitol.
Now it is up to Congress to confront this egregious assault. We're going to walk down, and I'll be there with you. We're going to walk down. We're going to walk down anyone you want, but I think right here we're going to walk down to the Capitol.
Driving into Washington, D.C. that morning, I saw men over near Pentagon City wearing orange hunting hats. They were hiking towards the United States Capitol, and I thought to myself, wow, that's not really a sight that you see every single day. I had a 45-minute walk to the National Monument, and along the way I would hear people call out for civil war and to take their country back. There were people gathered over near the National Mall where Trump was speaking, so I made my way that way and tried to get as close as I could to what was happening. Once Donald Trump started speaking, the crowd was so large that you couldn't actually get to where he was speaking. You could sort of see it off in the distance, and you couldn't hear him at all. Well, I kind of just stood around and took pictures of the people that were hanging around the National Monument. Then I saw people from the National Monument start to head over to the United States Capitol before Donald Trump finished his speech that day. So this photo I took here was the walk to the US Capitol. I switched to a long lens and I wanted to get a picture of that walk. I also live streamed it like many of the people did that day. I thought it was an important walk, but it was interesting to see the different groups that were there and what they were calling for. So as I arrived at the base of the Capitol, there was a small group that had already arrived. There was a barrier set up with US Capitol Police, and all of a sudden someone started yelling, "Charge." And right after that, a man, as you can see in this photo, allegedly, he was the one that pushed the barrier up into US Capitol Police. And then that really started off the day. People broke the barrier and ran into the Capitol grounds. As you can see in this photo again, this man, Ryan Samsel, very well-known Capitol rioter, was having a heated exchange with a US Capitol Police officer. So I sort of let the crowd move ahead of me, and I did that so I could kind of put on my helmet and get ready for the events to take place next. A large crowd was gathered, and they were at the steps of the US Capitol, the lowest level of the steps, and they were starting to fight with US Capitol Police. US Capitol Police was spraying them with pepper spray. Trump supporters were spraying them back with bear spray, and very quickly, tear gas canisters and flash grenades were thrown into the crowd. And then alternatively, you had Trump supporters and Trump protesters throwing the barrier fencing into US Capitol Police. And I love this photo because you can kind of see the chaos that happened in the day where a Trump supporter was throwing this barrier, and US Capitol Police were clearly not prepared for this type of violence. You also had Metropolitan Police arrive at the scene that were dressed in more riot gear. And then once this started to escalate a little bit, it got extremely violent. So as far as going into the Capitol, there was a very short amount of time to do so. I kind of fell back. I wanted to take in all that was happening. My lens and camera was covered with pepper spray. There was just an altercation where the Trump supporters threw a large flag, a banner, up over the crowd into US Capitol Police. So I needed to clean my lens, and I also wanted to kind of take some footage of the agitators that were there, getting more of the Trump supporters to fill in around the US Capitol. So I fell back and I filmed some of that. And there was a split second that if I continued to follow those original people that I did when I first got to the barriers of the Capitol, I probably would have entered the building, but I didn't. And what actually ended up happening is I ended up staying at the west entrance of the Capitol where I was surrounded by some of the most violent altercations of the day. The United States Capitol became sort of a fortress where you had people wanting to storm the Capitol. They wanted to fill in and they wanted to have their voices heard. Again, this goes back to the sentiment that happened prior to the election where Trump supporters felt like they weren't having a voice. Not saying that that was justification for the day, it just sort of was the narrative and the sentiment of the overall day. As I made my way up to the west entrance or the west tunnel of the Capitol, you could start to see people had wounds. There was blood throughout the Capitol grounds from the different altercations. And this picture here shows a little bit of that. And I think it's a very symbolic photo of the overall day. You have a man, he's clearly very injured here. You have a Back the Blue sign on the back of this person's jacket. And then you have a 3%er flag in the United States Capitol in the background. I really think this photo sums up the day and kind of the events that took place. So as I made my way to the west entrance tunnel of the Capitol, there was a small stairway, and that's where it was kind of a bottleneck to get up to the second level of staging. You also had in that stairway a door. And I'm not really sure to this day what that door was and where it led to, but I was just surprised that no one was trying to enter that door. There was a man that in the stairwell decided to open the door, and he was met immediately with a show of guns to him. And he ended up closing the door, and that was the last of it. Another photo here that covers kind of the chaos of that day, it's also one of my favorite photos, is you had Trump supporters at the west entrance of the Capitol where they were fighting with U.S. Capitol Police and Metropolitan Police. And there's a ladder, there's people trying to get in, there's people up on the staging, up on the steps. And you had just a chaos scene where people were being pepper sprayed. You had a ladder in the scene where people were trying to use that ladder to breach this so-called fortress of the Capitol, and without really much luck. It was very overcrowded, and this set the tone for the rest of the day. At the west entrance, I had made my way to the steps. The steps is where rioters were fighting with police. A woman had allegedly died on the steps, and I thought to myself, well, this is where the story is that day, and I need to capture this footage. So I went onto the steps of the Capitol, and there was a man that was throwing a table at U.S. Capitol Police. And then alternatively, there was another man that was using a table leg to hit police. This man, allegedly, he's from Rhode Island, and he had a backpack on. That backpack allegedly was full of axes. So you can get a little bit better understanding of the violence that took place that day. As I'm on the steps of the west entrance, these are the steps where just in a couple weeks, the president would walk down for the inauguration. I had turned to look at the crowd and look at the National Mall. Within a few seconds, I would hear a woman, an older woman, running up to the steps and saying, "I want to see my senator." This woman, I said to her, I said, "Well, what purpose is that going to do? What are you trying to accomplish?" Before I could hear her answer, a man in a cowboy hat threw a homemade explosive device into the tunnel. This startled the crowd and, of course, myself. I turned around. I was immediately pepper sprayed by U.S. Capitol Police. Once I was pepper sprayed, I could hear the woman saying, I was blinded, I could hear her saying, well, maybe I should probably go back down into the crowd. Obviously, it was very dangerous. I couldn't see her. And I walked down into the crowd as well, and I had asked someone if they were able to help me out. One of the rioters and Trump supporters offered to help me, but I actually wasn't sure up until a couple months ago whether that Trump supporter helped me with pouring water in my eyes or had actually spit in them. Here you have rioters didn't give up fighting with the U.S. Capitol Police. Here you have a man that fought with the U.S. Capitol Police for several hours. This man is known as Edward Jacob Lang. He was one of the most notorious rioters of the day, allegedly, and he's now serving, obviously, prison time, like many of the rioters that were there that day. But he was explaining about how the death of the woman on the United States Capitol, the West Entrance steps, how that happened. And I captured this along with some video of that. And again, it's not maybe the best photo, but it certainly shows, again, more of the chaos of the day. As the rioters continued to try and get into the tunnel, they did this for at least another an hour or so. A man came out of the tunnel wearing camouflage, and he had a M4 firearm, and he had pointed it at the crowd with a flashlight on it. It was getting kind of dark in the day, and we weren't sure, and I shouldn't say we, but the crowd wasn't sure. There were rumors going around that someone was shot inside the Capitol. So really no one was sure about what the intentions of this person were, whether they're National Guard or Metropolitan Police, but they were certainly gathered the attention of the crowd. And before really the crowd could figure out what the purpose of this person was, Capitol Police from up above on the top deck, they used tear gas canisters and shot them into the crowd to clear out the Capitol. While this was successful, it was also extremely dangerous. You had at least 1,000 people plus on top of the staging of the Capitol. And I think we were all very lucky that more people didn't die that day. Since the Capitol riot, there really hasn't been much change. The kind of political discourse that's happening across the country. You still have people engaging in political violence. Obviously, those groups that were at the Capitol and the left-wing groups that were prior to the election, they're more fragmented. And also, the Capitol riot, since that day, has really been used as a level of propaganda for either side.
So in the coming weeks of when you were planning to go to the U.S. Capitol, what were you expecting to photograph and experience upon your plan to be there?
So leading up to January 6th, you kind of followed all these events that happened, and you knew what was kind of going to take place, including the storming of the Capitol. There were other state capitals that had been stormed, and we kind of knew that that was going to be an interesting day. There was 2 prior events in D.C. that people had, but this was the first one that Trump was speaking at. And so you knew that I think he had called for wild protests. So while I didn't know exactly what to expect, kind of knew that something big was going to happen.
So why do you think DC didn't seem so prepared for something of this?
I honestly don't know. I mean, U.S. Capitol Police were completely unprepared, as you can see in my photographs. And actually, I kind of felt bad for them. They lacked all the equipment required for this type of protest. I don't know why they were so unprepared, but everyone else was prepared.
No conspiracy theories?
I'm not going to get into conspiracy theories.
What was the most powerful moment to you as a photographer, being at the U.S. Capitol, experiencing the things that you saw happening?
I think just being there in the moment and getting to experience that day, you know, a lot of people hearing it on TV, a lot of people watching it on TV, but actually being there and being able to photograph this historic day and finding the truth in the event and the things that took place that day.